They say that journalism is the art of writing with absolute authority about something you know nothing about. I saw that several times this week, including some stuff related to black-on-white crime and black-on-white violence. Let's start over at NPR. They had a story this week. Two reporters were ecstatic about the story they were talking about all this job growth, 7 straight quarters or whatever their number was. Rah, rah, rah. They were so happy their side was winning this fight for economic growth and jobs and da-da-da-da-da. Not once did anybody mention labor participation rates, how they're at all-time lows. These numbers are just numbers. They represent reality, okay? Some numbers represent reality less well than others. Unemployment is just a very narrow definition of people who were working a little while ago. They're not working now. They're looking for work. That number's 5 or 6%. But the number of people who aren't working, who gave up working, that number is enormous. It's 95 million people in this country now who are out of the workforce. We've never had that many people out of the workforce. We've never had a lower percent of our population working. And all this reality intruded on that little bit of fantasy, the very next story, because the very next story, a different reporter, different part of the country came in and they're doing a story about college students living at home with their parents. They go, yeah, they can't find jobs. There's no jobs for these kids out there. And so the reality intruded in their little bit of fantasy. And we see that a lot. I mean, here's another story. Okay, so how many weeks ago was it? This is upcoming week coming up is week 6 for the NFL. For the last 5 weeks, ratings by every measure you can imagine for NFL football have been dropping. Week to last year. Game 5 Monday night versus Game 5 Monday night last year. And they've got all these wacky excuses. I heard a national sports talk radio talk an hour about how, everybody's watching the red zone. Everybody's watching Twitter. Everybody's doing this. Everybody's doing that. That's why the ratings are down. Because you're watching football in ways that don't show up in the ratings. NFL put out a letter this week going, we're still a great place for advertisers. The best thing on TV. And darn it, that's why you shouldn't worry about that 10, 15, 20, 33% decline in ratings this year, from depending on what game, what time. It's all about the presidential election. It's all about blah, blah, blah. And it has nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that a good chunk of players in the National Football League are kneeling down to protest the flag, to protest the police, and to promulgate a lie that black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything, especially why cops are always picking on them for no reason whatsoever. People don't want a part of that lie. One of the reasons is the reality of the lie is constantly intruding into their carefully constructed little bubble. It intrudes in a way that even sometimes reporters can't ignore. That's what we saw this week in Chicago when we put to the test the whole fairy tale. Cops are always picking on black people for no reason whatsoever.
Good evening to you. I'm Marion Brooks.
I'm Rob Stafford. Tonight at 10, troubling news. Chicago police video. It shows a suspect attacking a female officer, but that's not all. It also shows how the officer failed to fight back, and the reason for that makes the video all the more chilling. NBC5's Trina Orlando's in the newsroom with more tonight. Trina.
Rob, police say the officer was afraid to pull her gun because of the scrutiny she and her fellow officers would have to endure. Instead, she suffered a brutal beating that was all captured in 2 violent videos.
That's him?
A dash cam captured this video as police approached the suspect walking on the sidewalk.
I ain't playing with you, dude. I'm going to tase you in like 2 seconds.
The suspect resists arrest even as police officers try to place him in handcuffs. Moments later, a scuffle breaks out, the suspect throwing punches before grabbing the female officer's hair and pulling her to the ground. A closer look shows her head bouncing off the ground. Police say so hard she was knocked unconscious. The body camera of another police officer arriving on scene shows as he tries to pull the suspect from the huddle.
He's got a PO's head. He's not letting go. We're tasing him. It's not working.
Officers were eventually able to subdue the suspect, identified as 28-year-old Parta Huff of Maywood. Police say he slammed his car into a liquor store Roosevelt and Cicero while high on PCP. Superintendent Eddie Johnson says the officer who was attacked at the scene thought she was going to die.
She knew that she should shoot this guy, but she chose not to because she didn't want her family or the department to have to go through the scrutiny the next day.
A thought apparently shared by others back at the scene.
A couple months ago, you could have shot him.
The officer suffered a concussion, neck injury, and lacerations to her face and head. She also chipped bones in her wrist and shoulder. Chicago police tell me tonight the officer remains in the hospital more than a week after this happened.
So far this year, there have been 3 major cities that have done reports on racism inside their police department, and the 3 reports are basically identical. I think they were written in some kind of hut in the countryside in India, some remote village in India that has a little satellite dish that can, project, that can send this information all over the world. The reports are identical. We got Chicago, Baltimore, and this week San Francisco. They all did these major studies showing that the cops inside their police departments are all a bunch of racist pigs. Hillary says it's all about implicit bias. Translation, bias that she imagines white cops are guilty of because too many black people are in prison. And since white people and black people are the same in every single way, white people commit the same amount of crime as black people do, there's only one reason there's more black people in prison. That's because the cops are biased. Get it? And so we have study after study after study showing these cops are bad people, totally ignoring the enormous level of criminality in Baltimore and Chicago, which is basically, these 2 cities are basically ruled, large parts of these cities are now ruled basically by anarchy. San Francisco, a lot of street crime in San Francisco. A lot of black people beating up Asian people. It was, anybody who read White Girl Bleed a lot remembers this story. They did a study in San Francisco of all these street robberies, armed and strong-arm robberies and assaults. They found out like 80 to 90% of the assaults in San Francisco were black people beating up Asian people. There were no federal inquiries. There were no outraged television reporters. It was just people shrugging their shoulders and saying, that sounds about right. Because Lord knows we're not going to make the black kids angry around here.